I played RE7 many years ago, and I thought it was a really good game. It made me feel more positive about future Resident Evil games at the time, since RE6 was, when I finally played Village, I instantly got into it, especially since it felt like a mix between RE7 and RE4. It takes quite a bit from both games, which isn't a bad thing since it kept me hooked from start to finish. So Resident Evil Village once again has you playing as the protagonist of RE7, Ethan Winters. Years after the events of the previous game, Ethan is finally living a peaceful life with his wife Mia and their child Rose. But everything changes one evening when Chris crashes into their home, taking their daughter and dragging him away. After he gains consciousness, he finds himself in a snowy area alongside a crashed van. He wanders off and ends up at a mysterious village that's full of infected, werewolf-like villagers. That doesn't stop Ethan though, since he's determined to do whatever it takes to rescue Rose. As much as I liked RE7, I wasn't completely sold on Ethan as a worthy protagonist in the series. Like, I'm sure a lot of you would agree that Chris, Jill, and Leon are way cooler. But playing through Village made me realize that Ethan can be just as awesome, and I'd say that he's one of the most interesting characters in the series because he's average. He's just a normal guy who happened to be dragged into horrific situations that previous Resident Evil characters could easily breeze through. It makes it even more interesting when he succeeds against all odds. He goes through a ton of character development throughout the game, and seeing him grow stronger with each challenge made me want to keep cheering for him. Now, RE Village has its survival horror moments like RE7, but it has way more action going on. The starting area of the game feels kinda like the village from RE4, except it's snowy and it has werewolves. You'll be scavenging for items throughout the game while trying to survive all the horrors that the game's antagonists throw at you. Yeah, I say antagonists because the game has quite a few of them, which really surprised me when I started my playthrough. Like, all I knew about the game before that was werewolves in a village, Chris Redfield in a trench coat, and Mommy. I don't want to say too much, but I was surprised at how varied the locations were, from a haunted house to a creepy factory. Every area was great in their own way, but my personal favorites were the village and Dimitrescu's castle. I'm still biased towards the village though, because it was really fun to explore. You could go into different houses and find things like money, treasure, and other items. I also liked how progressing through the game would help you unlock previously inaccessible buildings and other areas in the village too. It was very rewarding to backtrack and see what you can find, whether it was a cool item under a well or a not so great surprise. I had so much fun with RE Village's combat since it was the perfect mix of survival horror and action-adventure FPS. Ethan can use a bunch of different weapons, with the early ones being the knife, pistol, shotgun, and rifle. While the weapons feel familiar to the previous games, the FPS nature of Village makes every fight feel so much more intense. I make sure to empty my pistol before using anything else, just like every RE game I've played. But there were times where I'd just panic and pull out other weapons when an enemy's heading straight towards me. I'm not scared of werewolves, but there's just something about their appearance and the way they moved here that freaked me out. Don't get me started on the stronger armored enemies later on. If you drop by my stream of this game, I'm sure you've seen me empty magazines and throw all my pipe bombs at them. But outside of freaking out during combat, I loved how satisfying it is to land multiple headshots on enemies, even though some of them can feel like bullet sponges that make me wonder if I was actually damaging them. It was thrilling having to manage my resources too. The game gives you a lot more items and materials, so you won't feel too helpless, but you still need to craft ammo and first aid meds as much as you can. It made the game feel more intense, especially during boss fights. I thought the bosses in Village were amazing, by the way. It was already pretty fun just having to shoot them down, but I didn't know that the others would have different mechanics to beating them. It made them feel just as varied as the areas that they were located in. I thought they were really interesting too. So interesting that I found myself reading through notes that were scattered around their zones, just to find out more about them. Now for other RE4 inspired things, like the Duke. Meeting the Duke was really cool since he's similar to the RE4 merchant, but a bit more involved with the story. Using coins and loot that you get from enemies, you can buy supplies, weapon attachments, and upgrades from him. You can also sell treasures and unwanted items that you have. Gems can be attached to treasures, just like RE4, and you can find unique items that you can sell to the Duke as well. He can even cook you meals later on that give permanent buffs, as long as you bring him the ingredients. And by bring, I mean hunting innocent chickens and pigs. Oh, and going fishing! Most of these things are optional, but I thought they were just as fun as that ball puzzle game that you can play throughout different areas. I thought that Resident Evil Village was really good overall. I'm not sure how long it took me to finish it, but I'd say around 10 hours or so. But yeah, I love this game. Blasting through enemies and going through the survival horror sections throughout the game was great, and the story ended up being quite emotional too, with all its twists and turns. It made me feel even more excited about future Resident Evil games, but at the same time, it made me wonder where the series is going to go, since, well, Ethan was a brand new protagonist after all. It makes me wonder if the devs will bring back some fan favorites for the newer games, or if they'll continue to experiment and evolve the series. Whatever happens, I think they have a really good formula going on right now, both with the remakes and the newer games. I highly recommend Resident Evil Village if you want to play an excellent survival horror game that mixes a lot of the cool stuff from the previous games, all while doing really unique things on its own. Oh, but before I end the video, I'll be talking about the Shadow of Rose DLC. So, massive spoilers for the main game. If you haven't played it already, feel free to skip to my outro or drop the video now. Shadow of Rose takes place over a decade after the events of Resident Evil Village. Rose is now a teenager, but she isn't exactly happy with her life because of her powers. She gets bullied in school for being different, and she has nobody to talk to about it. When she finds out that getting hold of a purifying crystal can get rid of her powers, she goes into the fragment of the Megamycete and explores familiar places from the main game. The DLC is in third person, but it has the same gameplay as Village, though I'd say it's a bit more survival horror for the most part, because you need to manage your resources more. Ammunition felt way more scarce in the DLC, so you can't blast through enemies. It doesn't help that you can't move too fast as well. Controlling Rose made me feel like I was playing a nerfed version of Ethan, since she can't block attacks and she's frequently running away from enemies. But I guess it makes sense for story reasons since, you know, she's not as experienced as Ethan with fighting monsters and exploring creepy old buildings. I also can't blame her too much for running away from the zombie mold guys. They're terrifying, and they take a lot of bullets to kill. Thankfully, Rose's powers come in handy, in both combat and exploration. A lot of the areas that you'll be familiar with, like Castle Dimitrescu, have pathways that are blocked by mold. As you progress through the game, you'll gradually unlock more of Rose's powers, so you can use it to clear certain places, and you can even slow down enemies with it. I know I complained about her being more sluggish than Ethan, but it grew on me because of the DLC's survival horror focus. Exploring and fighting the mold enemies felt way more intense, especially when I was in small spaces. I like being able to go through the same areas from the main game too, just because the DLC put a whole new spin to them. But as fun as the DLC was, I didn't like how things that happened in the game later on made it feel pointless for me. Like, I thought that RE Village had a satisfying ending, but Shadow of Rose tried to insert itself into that storyline, just to add unnecessary details and repeat the same stuff to both the gameplay and events. It even goes for the same formula, trying to tug my heartstrings even though I've experienced it enough in RE Village. It's still a fun DLC though, and I'd say it's worth the 3 hours that it takes to beat it. I like playing as Rose and seeing what she was like when she's older. It's just, the whole thing ended up feeling like a filler episode to me by the end of the experience. I recommend playing the DLC only if you're interested in playing a short adventure starring Rose. Let me know what you thought about the video, and thank you to my patrons at Patreon for supporting my channel. I'm still on vacation at the time that this video's been posted, but I'll be back at the end of the month. I'll be working on videos and streaming as usual once I'm back. So, yeah, thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next video.